Hey guys, Dr. Snellgrove here, just recording a quick video for the body paragraphs of our first essay here in Comp 2. And I feel like I'm always giving this disclaimer, and it's meant to be reassuring to students. Hopefully it'll be reassuring to you. But the first thing I always like to share with Comp 2 students about the structure of body paragraphs is something similar. I think I told y'all same thing about the intro paragraphs is the essential blueprint, the essential structure hasn't actually changed. There's not some like, here's the brand new way that we do it, because we're in Comp 2 instead of Comp 1 now. Everything is, in fact, what you remember. And I know some of y'all are sitting there like, what if I don't remember that, Dr. Snellgrove? It's like, all right, let me see if I can pull this up for you. It's like Mr. Magoo trying to find the right screen share here. There we are. So this is our basic format here. You probably, hopefully, remember this from Comp 1, where at bare minimum, well, not even at bare minimum, this comprises the entire, body paragraph. We have to have a topic sentence, 3 or more, I encourage more, supporting sentences, and then a conclusion/transition sentence. And so one of the things, I always point this out, I think I'm the only one that is that interested in it, all things considered, but basically body paragraphs are miniature essays and vice versa. What do I mean by that? Well, when you think about the structure of an entire essay, right? You've got an intro at the top that gives us our thesis. We've got a concluding paragraph at the bottom, and then we have 3 supporting, paragraphs in the middle that support the thesis. So what do you have here in a body paragraph? You have a topic sentence that gives us our supporting argument, right? You have a concluding/transition sentence at the bottom, and then you have 3 supporting sentences or more that are meant to support the argument in the topic sentence. So I just always found that a little fascinating. It's kind of the Zen-like art of writing, right? The drop becomes the ocean becomes the drop. All right, so I was going to go over these parts kind of briefly because I think you already know these basics, and then probably look at an example paper with you, point out what they're doing right, and in some cases what they're doing not so right. All right, so the topic sentence is exactly what it says there. It's like, all right, so maybe you have some sort of thesis. For instance, like, well, hopefully you have a thesis, but let's say you have a thesis kind of like, in Edgar Allan Poe's The Black Cat, the narrator turns to violence not simply because of alcoholism, but because of his BPD or something like that. Like, you've diagnosed him with a mental illness. It's like, okay, that's your thesis. So then what are we doing in our body paragraphs? Well, we're backing up this idea that like Poe's narrator had BPD. That's a hot take. That's certainly not spelled out in the story explicitly. So I've got to find different ways to back that argument up. All right, what are ways I can do that? So the topic sentence, you don't have to write everything quite so robotically, but you can start topic sentences off like, the first reason we can tell that Poe's narrator had BPD is blank. What is it, some sort of sign from the story? And we'll circle back here in a minute to how you might discover these signs and how you might integrate research and all that fun stuff. But yeah, it's like the first reason we can tell that he has this is blank, and then a topic sentence for a next body paragraph. The second reason we can tell he has BPD is blank. So on a very basic, very fundamental level, that's one way you guys can look at what you're doing here in the body paragraphs, right? It's like, hey, I've made an argument. I made a claim in my thesis, and by definition, I had to get on to some people in earlier drafts of like intros. But by definition, if you've got a thesis that nobody disagrees with, it's not really a thesis. I had a few people like Alice Munro's Boys and Girls talks about gender. Sure does. But that nobody would disagree with that. But we need you to go that step further. Like Alice Munro's Boys and Girls is encouraging readers to fight against, gender stereotyping. Like, is it? Because we do have that interesting ending where the narrator seems to be accepting, like, man, maybe I am just a girl. So the idea, like, this is definitely what Alice Munro wants to think, that's a hot take. Therefore, it's an argument. Therefore, not everyone's going to believe it. So what am I doing here in my body paragraphs? I'm trying to lay out as much evidence as I can to persuade as many people as I can. So I know it's the tiredest metaphor in like all of English, English teacher history, but it's a lot like convincing a jury, right? Because I always remind students, technically you're not writing the paper for me. You're writing this paper for, like, oh, imagine this is my audience is college freshmen. And so this won't happen, but like, let's imagine that I'm showing your paper, or your paper somehow gets read by like 25 college freshmen. Are they going to believe it? Well, some of them, yes, some of them, no. So it's like, hey, I just want to lay out as much evidence as I can to convince as many of them as I can. So it's like that. Hence the first reason Poe's narrator had BPD. The second reason Poe's narrator had BPD, or the first reason Monroe clearly wants us to fight against gender roles is the second reason. So topic sentence tells us what you're gonna the supporting argument you're gonna argue in that paragraph. And then the 3 plus supporting sentences, exactly what it says there. Back the topic sentence up with a combination of quotes and analysis. So, again, if you think of the body paragraphs as like miniature papers unto themselves, I throw out like, the first reason we can tell, Poe's narrator had BPD is blank. It's like, okay, now what do I do? I now need to sell my reader on this supporting argument. So I'm going to explain, I'm going to bring in like examples from the story, like quotes from the story. I'm going to analyze those. I'm going to bring in outside research. So for instance, if you are doing one of those like diagnosing the narrator sort of things, one easier approach to the paper might be to bring in like actual medical sources, like, hey, I went to, Harvard, medical over here, and I've got the signs of BPD. And then it's like, well, I'm going to see how I can map these on to what is going on with the narrator there. And you have lots of options here. I was helping a student earlier that was arguing that the narrator is actually possessed by a demon. You better believe we were finding like seminary papers. What are the signs of demonic possession? And then we can map out. So I know it sounds kind of silly, but basically, if you remember back to 1101, this is like your ethos. You bring this research in. It's like, don't just take my word for it. This person also says that's a sign of BPD or whatever. So I didn't bother to put it on here in my my weird little basic body paragraph structure. But that's part of what I often preach to the face-to-face students as the world's saddest infographic. I've got the thing that I'm arguing, and then I have anything else that I can bring in. Quotes from the story, quotes from other places, even anecdotes from my own life. I need to constantly find ways to connect what I've brought in back to what I'm arguing. So if you bring in a quote from the story, we got to tie it back to what you're arguing. If you bring in a quote from, anywhere else, we got to tie it back to what you're arguing. It's a real, once you get in the groove of it, it's actually a real win-win, because doing that approach, it makes your actual arguments stronger, and it also makes the paper longer. Because I've noticed a lot of students that struggle with, how am I going to hit 5 pages, you monster? These are also students that, don't really analyze quotes, or at least don't analyze the quotes fully. And so it's like, well, yeah, if you have no real analysis in here, it's like cutting paragraphs in half, maybe even worse than that. All right. The concluding / transition sentence. So just like in 1101, we want to have a final, sentence in any given paragraph that wraps up what you have been arguing, and then it segues us into the next one. So this is why you're not stuck with the outlines you submitted, way back when or anything. But that's one of the reasons that on the outline, I'm always asking you, hey, what are like 4 supporting arguments you think you're going to bring into the paper? So you as the writer have a game plan of like, I'm wrapping up body paragraph 1. What am I going to talk about in body paragraph 2? So for instance, if my main thesis is that in Boys and Girls, Alice Munro encourages all readers to fight against, enforced gender roles. All right, so maybe in my first body paragraph, I'm talking about the narrator's daydreams, where she sees herself as like a masculine avenging cowboy hero, right? And then maybe in the next section, I want to talk about how the narrator really doesn't want to end up in the kitchen. She sees her mom there. It clearly sucks. So maybe I've got a final sentence where it's like, in her daydreams, the narrator may be an avenging cowboy hero, but in her waking hours, there's a nemesis that not even she can beat in a showdown, and that's the kitchen. And then the next paragraph, another way we can tell Monroe is encouraging us to fight against strict gender roles is the narrator's reaction to life in the kitchen. yada yada. So that's all it is. I feel like I've been preaching this nonstop to all my classes lately. But if you've ever had teachers say your essay doesn't flow well, that's what they mean right there. They're just talking about you need more transitions between your sections. If you don't have those transitions, if you're not careful, the whole paper might feel like you just several different arguments that got stapled together, but there's nothing really linking one section to the next. All right, so I don't want to spend a lot of time doing this, but I wanted us to look at the sample paper. I might get off my ass and post some of these to your Canvas. But I want you to look at some ways that previous writers have done this, and none of these things I might show you are going to be like perfect. Make your essay look exactly like this, but I thought it might help you guys to see sort of what's going on here. So this person's slightly wordy thesis. Alice Munro's use of the characters and parallels between the children and horses is a quiet message to others that condemns the fixed nature of gender roles and expectations, encouraging a message that anyone is capable of anything despite the roles pressured onto them by those around them. So it's well written, it's a tad wordy, but she is in fact doing the kind of thesis I was just telling, like Alice Munro is encouraging everyone to fight against gender roles. Like, okay, so what are we doing in our body paragraphs? And I will say I kind of wish that she had, in some cases, her second sentence as her first, because every now and then the first sentence wasn't the first sentence wasn't the topic sentence. But so she starts out like horses do not have gender roles in the groups they're in. There's no blah, blah, blah. But then we get within the short story Boys and Girls, she didn't need to italicize that, but within the short story Boys and Girls by Alice Munro, two horses are used to parallel the two children in the story. All right, so that's a good topic sentence. And the topic sentence has a lot of shared DNA with the thesis where, okay, it's a supporting argument. By definition, an argument has to be something that not everyone is going to agree with. So she's coming, no pun intended, or right out of the gate here with, hey, those horses symbolically represent the kids. But interesting. Okay, that's definitely not spelled out in the story. Not everyone is going to agree with that. So it is a hot take, but that's what you need. You're the writer, you're giving us an argument, we need a hot take. So anyways, she gets into like supporting arguments here. Our supporting sentences. Mac, the male horse, parallels the younger brother by being described as slow and easy to handle. Flora, the female horse, parallels the narrator with having a very wild personality, being described as being loved due to her speed and high stepping. All right, so she gets into this, and I did want to show you this, some of what she's doing here as a great example of when I do that whole world status infographic thing, where it's like, here's what you're arguing, you bring something else in, you got to find ways to connect these guys together. So she has a lot of narrative detail here, where it's like, this happened, this happened, this happened. But it's not summary, because whenever she's in the midst of telling you what happened, it's immediately followed by stuff like, the use of Flora escaping shows the narrator's last attempt at freeing herself from the pressures of her family. So it's like, hey, I explained some of what's going on, and then I immediately tied it back to the thing I'm arguing. And y'all are probably getting sick of me gilding this particular lily, but that's the reason that I emphasize this so much, because if you get in the habit of doing this, you'll never, ever, ever be accused of summarizing in an essay again, because any like details of the story you bring in, you're just using those to prove your argument to the best of your ability, instead of just telling us X happened, then Y happened, then Z happened. All right. And so I'm going through here. Let's see. The second body paragraph has a better example of a topic sentence up front, I believe. Alice Munro shows that roles exist in our society, but not one sex or gender has to fit into those slots. The beginning of the story clearly shows the narrator is capable of participating in the task around the Fox farm, despite her family hoping for her to take on a more feminine role. So again, it's like, this is what this is what this body paragraph is going to be about. All of this is meant to back up the thesis, saying like, yes, Munro wants us to fight against these gender roles right here. All right. And so I will tell you that one thing, for better or for worse, this student didn't have a ton of quotes in here. Like, we're on, my gosh, is that right? I think we're on like page, I'm sorry, she does have a quote in here about, I was trying to look for external quotes, and this one's split across. Gender roles only apply to humans as they quote, are the product of the interactions between individuals and their environments. They give individuals cues about what sort of behavior is believed to be appropriate for what sex. Horses have interactions with each other and their environments, but they do not have the same roles as humans and are constantly trying to fight for equal roles in the family unit. That's actually a good quote for us to look at. I'm about to be wrapping things up here, but I wanted you to see that, like, when I say to bring in outside research, it's not always directly related to the story. Yes, if you're writing about boys and girls, nothing keeps you from finding other essays, other writing on boys and girls, and integrating that into your story, or whatever story, I'm sorry, into your essay, or whatever story you're writing about. But you can also, I hate this phrase, but think outside the box a little bit, where, hey, she clearly found, a like psychology paper about gender roles. And it's like, it's not about the story at all, but it has info about gender roles and their origin that she then used in the analysis to back up her argument. That kind of thing is fair game. Same thing as I was telling y'all earlier with the, like, I've diagnosed Poe's narrator. It's like, okay, yeah, you're probably not going to find a lot of papers that are like, Poe's narrator had BPD, but you will find plenty of sources on what are the signs of BPD, and then you can map, that to your diagnosis. You can map that to the narrator in order to prove your thesis. So I'll probably have some other content, videos, and or notes coming up in the near future about the body paragraphs. But in the meantime, y'all know the drill. If you have any questions, could be about the body paragraph assignment, this video, the text, or anything in between, feel free to text me at 863-835-2399 or just drop me an email. Bye.